Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the BimTube Podcast. So today I've got Tim Flower. So thank you very much for joining me, Tim.
Hi, thanks for having me, Stephen.
You're very welcome. And I'm very pleased to say that Tim has a background in the rail sector, like myself. So I'm very happy to explore where we go with this today, the intersection of data, digital, analytics, business intelligence, systems integration, and all of the above. We both have a background in, so that would be great. And of course, the podcast is not about me, it's about Tim today. But for people who haven't seen or listened to a podcast before, just to reiterate, the BIM in this context is better information management, just to keep, and I know it means other things, by the way, but we will focus on obviously the broader data, digital and technology, and that's the context. But Tim, please, if you would kindly introduce yourself to the audience, that'd be great. And also, if you don't mind, just a quick overview of your sort of career progression, just to show people that, you know, everyone has a different progression. And yeah, so over to you, Tim.
Yeah, so Tim Flower, I'm the UK account director for KONUX, which is a German scale-up specialising in predictive maintenance and artificial intelligence. So hopefully we'll come on to some more about that later. In terms of my career, I've been pretty much in the railway since I left university. Started by accident, temporary works in the accounts department in Derby, in a building that's now flattened. But pretty soon got into I guess fell in love with the railway, really, working my way up from a data entry clerk in the signalling department, implementing what was then called MIMS, now called Ellipse, so enterprise ERP type system. Then I went contracting for a bit again on the railway, looking at again implementing this monolithic system into an area that possibly didn't want it, with having it forced upon it. So very interesting times. But then I joined Network Rail in 2001, 2003 even, looking at how we improve data across the whole of what was Northwest Territory, which is now London North Western. Then did lots of things in that sort of area, looking at planning, looking at how we do business improvement, looking at program management. And I joined the centre, which I guess would now be the technical authority, to do a machine vision project for track inspection, which is sort of my first foray into artificial intelligence and predictive maintenance proper. Following that, which took quite a while, I will admit, but it was very successful in the end. We then moved into more broader program management. I was head of network operations programs, looking at rolling out remote condition monitoring across point machines, track circuits, as well as standardized tasks. So really defining and I guess systemizing best practice through CGI videos, alongside risk-based maintenance, and again more sort of predictive maintenance type stuff. I then became head of maintenance of Network Rail, which is a technical authority type role, looking at processes, procedures, assurance, so on and so forth. And then before I left, I was a chief intelligent infrastructure engineer, so really the technical sponsor for, I guess, again, predictive maintenance, but predictive asset management as well, really trying to drive a step change in those areas.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Wow, there's so much I could ask you, given this is a core area. I don't know where to go now. 60 minutes clearly will barely scratch the surface. But I guess one thing, again, bear in mind the audience may not be necessarily have a full-time job in data and digital. I mean, if you could just give I guess a case study or a use case of the kind of thing you would do or your team would do. So what I mean is from data collection to analysis, just like a high level process, if you wouldn't mind give an overview. So just so people can say visualize the kind of thing you're involved with, or the kind of processes you used to be involved with at Network Rail.
Yeah, I guess it's very similar to what we do now. It's just a different use case. But at a high level, you start off by deciding where you're going to where the business case is for what you're going to monitor. We then would roll out probably some hardware. So you would install some hardware that would monitor a certain parameter. So for point machines, you'd measure the current and the time taken to move the points from one side to the other, and the amount of current draw through that time, which you would then get a trace. That would then I guess under the existing regime, you would set some thresholds for how long the points take to swing, to move from one side to the other, or how much current they draw. And that if those thresholds are exceeded, you would have an alarm. From a people perspective, then there would be a set of technicians who log into the system and administer those alarms. And if they're deemed to be not false alarms, so proper alarms, they would then create a fault. So that would then trigger somebody to go out on site to try and rectify whatever the failure was before it actually failed. So it's all about, I guess, being preventative and predictive as much as possible. In the sort of newer world that we're moving to in terms of artificial intelligence, we're trying to build newer, more powerful algorithms that, rather than just looking at thresholds, look at circumstance. So what's the weather like, for example? How is that asset performing relative to itself, and how is that asset performing relative to others that are very similar? So that's where the artificial intelligence element comes in. But I guess at a high level, that would be a reasonable sort of business flow.
Great, thank you. And what you're describing to me, again, this is maybe stating the obvious, that there's a lot of talk nowadays around digital twins. I'll just get it out there and say it straight up so we know where we are. So for the people that are new to this, having a digital representation of the physicality, and it could be rail, could be anything, I guess. And then there's other language, industrial Internet of Things, and things like SCADA. Now, again, for the people who are new to sort of digital twins, what you're describing, what you just described, is kind of what people say when I go to conferences that we could do, but it sounds like you've been doing it. So what is there something, what's going on with people now talking about digital twins, about sensory equipment? Are we missing something? Is it in other sectors, or is it that rail is particularly advanced compared with other sectors? Or what I'm saying is, what do you make of digital twins and the terminology? It sounds like you've been doing a lot of this already.
So I guess digital twin can be very small or very big, and I think that's where it gets lost. It means many, many different things, doesn't it? If we pick the point machine analogy, or the point machine reference point, then you are able to twin perhaps 30 to 50% of what's happening. So you don't understand what's happening in the ground conditions, for example. You don't understand what's happening, starting to understand what happens with the weather, but not necessarily building it into the algorithm. So in terms of a twin, it's a twin of what's happening to the motor. It's not a twin of what's happening to the overall system. So I think that's kind of where we would want to get to one day, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that scale, or that system, and then obviously people are now talking about system of systems. I think that's really good to reflect on, because of course you're saying it would be a small, it's just a similar concept but at scale, isn't it? I know one of the themes, which obviously we're literally talking about, but maybe to explain to people, digitalization of the rail infrastructure, is that what you mean, the example you've given, or what else do we mean? What other broader concepts do you mean when we talk about the digitalization of the rail infrastructure?
So I mean, there's a huge amount happening both in Network Rail and in other infrastructure owners across the world. I think data is going to be absolutely fundamental to maintaining the railway in the future. In the UK, it's very hard to get access to the infrastructure because trains are running, and if trains are running, we don't want people out there whilst they're running. So you have to separate people from live running of trains. People want to run, operators want to run more trains, so the window for maintenance is also much reduced. And the only way that we can manage that is through digitalization. In terms of what that means, so for track inspection, that is for plain line, so the bits that aren't at the switches and crossings, that is done by a train these days across most of Network Rail's infrastructure. So a train goes along, it videos the track using very, very high speed cameras, then uses machine vision algorithms to say what's right and what's wrong, alongside other inputs such as track geometry. So there's track geometry is another measurement that tells you, I guess, the top, how well the train is going to ride over that particular asset in very simple terms. So how compliant is the track to how it should be? So is it twisting? Is it going up and down? Is it spreading? All those sorts of parameters, they all feed into the overall pattern recognition system to give a digitalization of what somebody used to do via walking every week. So and because you know exactly what it's going to tell you, they've also been able to do it less frequently as well. So that's a good example. There's drones, there's the remote condition monitoring, there's the fitment of sensors to bearers to understand vibration. There's things that measure if a train's brakes have got stuck on, for example, and there's things that measure if trains have flat wheels. So there's and some of these things have been around for 20, 30 years. So there's many different ways of digitizing the infrastructure, and a lot of investment is going into that area at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the semantics of, again, this is for people new to these concepts. Of course, there's BIM, building information modeling, and the broader concept, not just the modeling of buildings, for the benefit of people new to this, an international standard. And we're moving on to digitalization. I guess what you're involved with is then what do you do with the, or what could it mean? Which is a different concept, I guess. Have you got anything, just before I get on to some of the other thoughts we had about sort of more structured questions, could you just give an overview of the kind of sort of dashboards and analytics that you use? I know it'll be multifaceted, but again, I don't know about an obsession, but a fascination with other people talking about data and digital, and I think yeah, but you have to convey the message to people, and not the only way, but one way is simplified things like dashboards and maps. Have you got any good examples of simplified dashboards, maps that you use either with clients or you've used at Network Rail?
Yeah, so I guess at KONUX we put a huge amount of effort into building a user interface that's as user friendly as possible, because obviously that means that people can log in and understand what they see straight away. Network Rail again has done a huge amount of investment in trying to rationalize its systems. So I think probably 10 years ago there was 115 systems or something. Now there's probably still around 70 or 80, although some of those are quite small and specific. The biggest challenge really is getting the right information to a person that needs it when they are performing a certain task, which is a very high level statement. But for example, when a point machine is potentially failing, it would be useful to understand what's happening with the interlocking. So what's happening in the signaling system. At the moment, for a lot of the infrastructure, that's in two different places. So really the goal would be to have a single place where an engineer could go, where all the information is available to them, and that isn't there yet. Big strides have been made towards it, but at the moment you may have to go to several different systems to get the answer that you need, which is I guess it's a function of history. Railways have been around for many years, and lots of systems have been built through those years. But in terms of getting the right information, it's about presenting it in a way that people can easily digest, that's ordered sensibly, that tells them what they need to know, and ultimately will bring in lots of different data sources.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. About this sort of you're implying systems integration and master data management. I wouldn't normally touch on the actual phraseology for the audience, but I guess I will, because it's sort of like history repeating itself, isn't it? We've had these issues for a long time. I guess the difference now is the capability of the technologies is amazing. It's like almost unbelievable. So have you got anything to add? Because one of the topics we were going to mention was about moving to a software as a service for operational. Have you got any use cases on that? Because that was sort of certainly in the 90s and the 2000s, we talked about software as a service, but we didn't really get there, did we? So what's happening now, and what's your experience of that?
I think it's still still a lot of catching up to do in the world of operational technology for software as a service. I think it's the best way to describe it. I think the UK Railway has a preference at the moment to buy buy an asset and sweat it, so that and they see that that's possibly the best way of getting the most value from that asset. An example being, say, plain line pattern recognition would be a good example. We did that in 2000 and probably, how old's my daughter? 2011. We finished that off, and it hasn't evolved much since, which is, I guess, a typical example of railway, the way that railways operate. They buy something that works, and a consequence of buying it is that it doesn't naturally evolve because they invest elsewhere until they realize it's out of date, and then they invest in it, and you go through this cycle. In terms of there are some examples, I think, and it's interesting that the infrastructure management department, so the IT department, use software as a service almost for everything these days as well. So and that wasn't the case probably 5, maybe a bit longer ago. So the IT departments in railways have definitely changed, but the operational side still tends to want to buy something and use it for as long as it possibly can. It is starting to change. There are some good solutions out there. So I think One Big Circle's AVA solution, so forward-facing video solution, is as a service. Incremental have got some operations type technology, so train running type technology that is in a software as a service. So there is some light there. And in Germany, KONUX provide our insight software as a service, but we don't do that in the UK as yet. I just think there's huge benefits to transitioning, because you get the opportunity to benefit from a very quick upgrade cycle, as it's in the people that own the service's interest to continue to evolve that service to make it as usable as possible, and to add new features which you don't get if you just go down the route of buying a product. So I think there's a huge amount of opportunity there, but some progress, but not as much as we would perhaps like to see.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You think because we know the technology capabilities, it's within reason. You could kind of do anything that people can imagine now. It's just a game of catch up. And again, we're not picking on the rail sector, but we're just talking about across all infrastructure, all sectors now. So one of the challenges is certainly the legislation playing catch up. Have you got anything to add on that? I guess we need to be sort of sensitive around entities like the RSSB, the Rail Safety Board. But have you got anything to say around that we need to change the rules, the legislation to help catch up with the technology? Have you been involved in any of that? How do we move the goalposts, as it were, to accommodate new technology?
That's quite interesting. My experience is that we've not had any issues with the RSSB or the Office of Rail and Road in those sorts of areas. They've always, when I was at Network Rail, they always worked with us collaboratively. I think Network Rail is perhaps quite unique. I don't know if this is how unique this is actually, but compared to perhaps other infrastructure owners across Europe, Network Rail does set its own standards. Obviously, those standards are assured by the ORR, but Network Rail is in charge of its own destiny to a large extent, and has very, very good processes and procedures in place to make sure that that it's running a safe operation. So when we did, say, the machine vision inspection of track, which was called plain line pattern recognition, we were fully in control of the safety case. I say we, not the project team, obviously. The people signing off the safety case were fully in control of making sure that it did what it was supposed to do. So that was machine vision. So that's, I guess, the early artificial intelligence, and it we just had to demonstrate that it could perform to the same level as, I think we were given a criteria of a diligent, an experienced track inspector performing diligently. So setting quite making sure that it didn't miss stuff that a track inspector would find, and we had to do lots of testing to prove that. So I don't think there's legislation, and it's really interesting. You see read the government white papers about data sharing. Everything from that angle, I think, is in place. The rail data marketplace is coming on board, which the RSS, that's the RDG, isn't it? Sorry, the Rail Delivery Group are sponsoring. So all those elements are all going in the right direction. This standardized data sharing agreements, if you want to put data into the rail data marketplace, and it is very early days for the rail data marketplace, but they are all almost, I think, government driven to a large extent. So there does seem to be a will to share data for the, I guess, so people can create new products that help things run better. The mechanics behind that obviously take more time. Some data systems are so old that you can't get the data out of them. So there's lots of work to do in the background. But I think from that perspective, I think it's all in a pretty good shape.
Yep. Thanks, Tim. I mean that. Yeah, there's all levels of, I can say, challenge and opportunities, aren't there? Like the technology, and I sort of threw in there whether it be regulation, and you've quite rightly said, well, that can be managed. That I guess the other dimension is around the people change or business change. I know that's not just people, but have you got anything to say about that? I won't sort of put words in your mouth, but let's just say that can be the element that technologists often forget, the actual people change. Have you got anything to say around that, around the business change side?
Yeah, I guess there's two elements. Well, there's probably more. There's a lot more than two elements, but the biggest two elements are making sure that people have got the capacity to absorb the change. I think that's one of the biggest things that tends to be forgotten. It tends to be that you're trying to improve the working lives of the people that are most busy, which is great because you're going to make their life better, but they've got to free up time to make their life better, which isn't always that easy. So I think there's definitely something around, and lots of work has gone into this in the past, making sure that the parameters or the criteria for change are fully understood. So, how much capacity has a person got to change? Where does it sit in their overall priority? Where does it sit in the management priorities? And what can you not do to actually, well, what can someone not do to actually enable them to take that change on board and make it happen? So I think that's the biggest thing really, is definitely the people elements, making sure they've got the tools, making sure they've got the understanding and explaining why as well. I think sometimes the why is also forgotten. So just telling somebody to do something doesn't generally work. Telling them to do it because it will improve X, Y, or Z, or improve their own working lives, will obviously lead to more engagement and leading to them more likely to wanting to do it. There's obviously a generational thing. I don't know if that's the right word these days, but somebody who is much older hasn't grown up on a computer, whereas somebody who's just come out of university will be very au fait with digital systems. So obviously that needs to be managed as well. How do you support them? Can somebody in their team do the majority if they don't feel they're going to be capable of doing it as well? And the other bit is just making it easy, making sure the system is really intuitive, making sure that when they log in, it's dead obvious what they're supposed to do. That you've got user guides that are very simple and short, and really providing as much almost self-help as possible as well is quite important, because somebody might go on a training course in March and get the system in June. By that point, they've probably forgotten anyway, and that is almost unavoidable a lot of the time because of just the cycle of rolling things out and the amount of people you need to train. So there's lots of things around that as well.
Yeah, and again, just reflecting on building on that, it is as you've just explored, it is something to be thought of as a discipline in its own right. It does, and I will have said this on other podcasts, but it does amuse me often at conferences where we talk about not us, but one talks about digitalization and all the rest of it, which is great, right? This is what we're both involved with. It's important, but then the topics are everything but the technology. They are, as you've just said, change management. I often pick up on good communication based on what you were just saying. All these other disciplines, business process optimization, and they're all full-time mature industries. Have you got anything to say? Maybe not necessarily something you've worked on, because it might be sensitive, but anything where you've either seen good or not so good communications to people that are being affected? Or if you don't want to give a specific example, what do you think very specifically we could do to improve communication? I know you were touching on examples there of the why, but have you seen any good examples of where projects have said, ones you've led, ones you've been involved with, say, this is why we're doing it, here is some good messaging, and then people follow? Have you got any use cases?
Oh, that's a difficult one.
Putting you on the spot now, Tim, sorry. Or it could just be an industry, it could be something in an industry somewhere. You've seen good comms about this is how this tech or this digitalization program, what the benefits are. Do you see what I mean? Like, people just forget that bit, like almost stating the obvious sometimes, you know what I mean? Like, people are too close to it, they forget to state the obvious things sometimes.
Yeah, and I think I mean, I think just trying to clarify, I guess the context of Network Rail is so if you're rolling out a track project, you've got 100 track maintenance engineers to speak to, so and you'll always get 15% that run with it. You've got probably 70% that are waiting for the 15% to make sure everything's good, and then you've got 15% who don't want it, and that's the challenge across any change project. And I think you've got to remember that with any kind of communication strategy or business change strategies, you're always going to get people that love it. One thing you've got to be careful of is that the people, if you get somebody that absolutely loves it as your key stakeholder, then you're going to design something for them, which is quite interesting. So you've got to make sure you design it for everybody, not just for the person who's really, really on board. And I think there's been issues with that in the past, where it becomes almost somebody's pet project, and they get something amazing, and then everyone's like, don't like that. So but in terms of broader communication strategy, I mean Orbis put a lot of effort. So that was Network Rail's I guess digitalization program for 2013 to 18. I might have got those dates slightly wrong, possibly around. They put a lot of effort into really trying to explain what they were trying to achieve. Possibly some might say too much. It's a very difficult balance, because you need to make sure you invest in the technology sufficiently such that it does what people need it to do, and also invest in the people change sufficiently so that they want to use it. I've never seen it. I can't think of an example that jumps out at me says, yeah, this was absolutely amazing. I think that's almost the nature of the landscape that you're trying to land stuff on in a big company like the railway, like Network Rail.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Tim. It was just to reflect on it, and you mentioned Orbis, and it wasn't loaded. And for the benefit of people listening and watching, I haven't primed this with Tim, but I often do give that as an example of something that I think is good. There was an infographic that I particularly use, and the comms, and yeah, maybe there's too much detail for some, but nevertheless, I often do refer to that in formal training I give, and when I say, well, have an infographic. If people can literally see themselves or their role, then they have a place. You have a place. You're a mobile operations manager, for example. There you are in this diagram. So I think people forget that infographics. But yeah, Orbis is one I would have said. I mean, just shifting gears if we can, and more to sort of generically the railway. Obviously, Network Rail is big in the UK. I've got some background in London Underground and the rest of it. But just switching gear to the actual technology now. Are there any exciting emergent sort of hardware technologies? We've talked about sensory equipment, but how about, say, exciting? It's all relative, isn't it? Anything like, and you've mentioned drones, but just for people, again, that aren't used to this kind of thing, what kind of drone imagery, and it might be something that you've already mentioned earlier on, but maybe with more detail about drone sort of sensor capture, for example, or something like that. Is there something that you would to share with us that's exciting new technology?
Yes, well, for me, definitely.
Yeah, no, so exactly. Tell us, what is it?
Yeah, there is loads going on at the moment. So, I mean, saw some really. So, in the railway, there is this huge program that's cross-European called Shift to Rail that's sponsored a number of really exciting work streams. To just give a bit of context, so one of the projects I saw out of that was a drone inspection project, and that was doing side-by-side comparisons of the same asset on 2 weeks apart, and being able to automatically pull out what had changed over those 2 weeks, show them side by side, be able to slide between the two. So that's got potential to be really powerful from an inspection perspective. They are doing loads of work in drones just to supplement I guess the existing inspection regime at the moment, but there's definitely potential for it to take over some of those inspection regimes, being able to do it beyond visual line of sight, so being able to send a drone off down a route and record certain features may well be really exciting. But sometimes you almost want somebody watching it, so you can stop the drone and say zoom in on this bit. So there's sort of there's two different use cases there really. LiDAR in general is advancing all the time. So there's LiDAR fitted trains, being able to, I guess, commoditize that beyond where it is today. So today it is probably quite expensive to do a survey using LiDAR. I think that is getting more and more cost effective, which means you can use it more often, which means you can start to study your overhead lines, study your ballast shoulder, so the position of the stones at the side of the track that keep the track stable in hot weather, being able to understand if vegetation is growing and what rate of vegetation, and almost get down to species detection. So there's huge amounts in that particular area. The whole train-borne world of inspection and measurements very exciting at the moment. Network Rail are refreshing and revisiting how they deliver that. So there's a huge program of work going on in that space, which will hopefully drive new innovations. And trains are being fitted with more and more equipment. So Northern Trains have, I think they call it the intelligent train. It's got all kinds of sensor on. It's got radar, LiDAR, vision, so on and so forth. Some of it will be successful, some of it won't. But it's nice to see that they've just gone for everything to see what they can see almost, and then work out which bits can add value. So it's quite I guess almost an innovative approach in itself. And then Network Rail are building new inspection trains to look at the switches and crossings in more depth than is currently possible, which will again change the dial in that area as well, because it is much more complicated once you get away from sort of the plain line, which is basically two clips and a rail and a sleeper, moving into all kinds of different components, and being able to do automatic inspection in that area will be phenomenal. And then from a hardware perspective, the kind of hardware that KONUX provides, fitting devices to the infrastructure itself, and being able to interpret the signature from passing trains to give new and different insights than are available today. So a train can measure voiding, so how much the track is deflecting as the train goes through it, but it can't necessarily pinpoint it to the exact bearer where the crossing is at the moment, and it can't measure the acceleration that's going into that asset. So sometimes there could be zero voiding, so there's no movement in the track, but huge amounts of acceleration as the train goes through different points. And being able to understand and interpret that is really, really exciting as well. So this is broad range of stuff, and there's things like Prometheus that have been on the BBC. So sending a little drone down a mine to scan the mine, and then bringing it back out again. So all things that are really difficult to do using traditional human methods are phenomenally exciting.
Great, thanks, Tim. And I think that Prometheus one is interesting, isn't it? That's because they had that on the film, didn't they? I've said that to people before. Say we actually have, or whoever there is technology capable of that. What I find. So thanks for the examples. That they're amazing. I've got some relationship with the Geo Business Show, which is a convention and conference in London, which I recommend people to go to, which is around geospatial and the drones, or the UAVs or UASs, whatever we should call them nowadays. Amazing technology. But of course, in our sector in rail, obviously it's a lot of it might be stating the obvious, which maybe we haven't said directly, is around safety. I mean, this is just so obvious that I do reflect sometimes that it's we have that hook, right? There's unquestionably things to improve safety, we focus on it. There's safety, efficiency, operational efficiency. Some other sectors haven't really found their place because they don't. I think in rail it always comes back to safety, does it? I mean, is that always the top case for you? I'm not trying to. This isn't a loaded question, but I always say I just go back to safety, and then operational efficiency and cost as secondary or tertiary. Is that how you always proposition sort of use cases, or is there another hook?
No, well, I guess there's two elements to it. One is, are you doing a project to improve safety? So obviously then the safety is the hook. So like safer trackside working that's been rolled out in Network Rail, keeping people separated from trains, the various sort of devices that allow you to get trackside and prevent trains running into that work site. So providing a physical device that can say that could tell the signaller there's a train in that section when there's not a train in that section, so the signaller can't then send a train down that route. I was trying to put it into layman's terms there. Sorry, I was struggling. I can explain it in railway terms. So lots of work in that area. I think the other side of it is making sure that what you deliver is safe. So you may deliver an efficiency program, but the number one core fundamental of that efficiency program will be to make sure that you follow the common safety method, that you deliver all the requirements that mean that the project delivers a safe outcome. So safety might not be the driver for that project, but safety will still be fundamental to actually delivering that project. So there are two elements. Quite often you will have a positive impact on safety by digitizing, say, track inspection, but the driver for that was definitely efficiency. So it's always but it's always there with any type of railway project.
Yeah, thanks Tim. It was more for the benefit of just to raise it for other for people listening or watching, because I'll often say is that is there. It's an obvious implicit aspect that bizarrely isn't necessarily always implicit in other domains, but I better not say more than that, even though it probably should be. So I guess for the benefit of people that don't know, then obviously in the United Kingdom we've sort of learned our lesson, let's say, on some maintenance issues, but certainly it all comes back to the process, doesn't it? Have you got anything to add? I know we've touched on it in multiple ways. You've mentioned it by name, process, then we talked about business change, but anything to say around business process optimization explicitly? Now, clearly that's kind of what we're aiming towards and trying to make things more efficient on process. Does your current company now that you work with or Network Rail, did you model business processes, or could you just explain what I mean by that for the benefit of people that don't know, and how we improve them?
Yeah, I think, well, a key part of any project really is to understand, I guess, the as is and to be. So what do you do? What does somebody do today to fulfill that requirement, and how are you going to deliver that requirement with the new system? So the business process modeling would be part of almost the requirements gathering. So just trying to understand what needs to change, who the various actors are, which roles are involved in discharging that requirement, and what will their role be in the future. It is a big part of it. And I think that's, again, it comes back to that's part of the business change as well. So you've got two elements. One is how do you design a system around the business process, and then how do you make sure that the people that are affected through that change are fully communicated and understood. So yeah, I think any good project, and definitely all the projects I was involved in Network Rail, would always look at that element as part of the requirements, because that's how you build your various use cases. So and what we're doing at the moment in KONUX is diversifying our portfolio, looking into a sort of more network product, a network wide product. So at the moment our initial product was around monitoring switches and crossings. We're now working with Network Rail to understand which processes could be leaned, for want of a better word, and how improved use of initially data engineering, and then moving into artificial intelligence type domains for scenario testing, scenario modeling, could make, I think, a positive impact on somebody's life in terms of having the data at their fingertips that they need, and then having a further positive impact in giving them the ability to justify decisions. So again, decision supports, I think, so quite a well used terminology in the railway. So helping them to justify why you did X rather than Y is something we really want to move into, and that will come through sort of the artificial intelligence sort of angle, and that's the goal we're looking at.
Great, thanks, Tim. The yeah, that definitely, that decision support, that, you know, I guess just going back for the benefit of the audience, that's what I was getting at with the dashboards. That is all about the decision. You know, how do you get people to understand the right decision? And you sort of touched on data, or I've written down evidence-based decision making. I mean, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Having trustworthy information, particularly when we're talking about critical infrastructure. I mean, there's no messing about, really. But it's really interesting. You've mentioned AI a few times. What, I mean, maybe you can't say, there might be proprietary technology, but what kind of tools are you using to train the AI? And, you know, do you get involved in that? Do you get involved in under the hood stuff? You know, what are you using? Can you say, or is it proprietary? How do you model the how do you train things?
I'm smiling because I don't know. That's way beyond my technical knowledge. If you'd asked me about the machine vision project, I could tell you.
Tell me about the machine vision project.
Yeah, so that used some German technology company called MVTech. I think it was called Hakon, or it might have been Halcon, because it was a few years ago now. But essentially, that was a model library. You segmented the rail or the infrastructure into various chunks and used the model library to identify what those things were. So the idea being that you'd tell it what it was supposed to look like, and it would tell you when it didn't look like that, in very simple terms. What we're using today, I really don't know. I'll leave that to the techie guys.
Yeah, fine. But the model library interests me there, because that reminds me of to the BIM. I know we're talking about a lot broader things than BIM here, but nevertheless, the BIM object libraries. Is that something, maybe not using that specific language of BIM, but is that something you work with clients? You help create feature or object model libraries? Is that something you do?
So I guess from our perspective, because we, I guess, own all the algorithms, what we try and work with the clients is to understand what they want to see. So what do you want to understand from this particular area? Or sometimes they don't know. So we will bring, I guess, expertise from what we've seen in Germany and take that into the UK. I mean, acceleration around the crossing being quite an interesting one. So we would try and understand how we can help them maintain differently, for example. So one of the things that we're looking at the moment is population based. So the way the track's designed, it's designed for different speeds, it's designed for different geometry and geography. So you will have a certain type of angle at a crossing, and understanding what a normal impact is at that particular type of crossing is very useful for application across all the other types of crossings in the UK. So understanding, construction and design can go a long way to helping interpret what we see from our devices. So that's the kind of thing that we're building. But yeah, that is generally our IPR, unless we do joint projects in the future.
Yeah, I understand, because it's and we've said it already, it's the service that you're providing. So therefore, I think that is quite interesting beyond the scope, I guess, of our conversation, but about where the intellectual property exists. I mean, certainly with a different hat on, there is that conversation around, which we're not necessarily focused on, around design. So I mean, more architectural type work, because there may be traditionally intellectual property in the modeling, in the creation of data. And now some clients would also like that intelligence. So it's quite interesting. We won't get into that because there's commercial things which isn't the scope of this. But anyway, if you're clearly providing a service, then the intellectual property in that model, and also I guess the benefits are that you're keeping that intelligence to work back into improving your model, right? It has to be your model.
Yeah, absolutely. I think every client we work with, they all have slightly different requirements around IPR. But one of the things that we really always want to work with them on is also having access to all the data, because that's how we make our models better for them. So data ownership is always quite an interesting subject. Different countries have different rules, different infrastructure owners have different requirements. So obviously we always have to work to form an agreement in that space. But yeah, one thing that we do see the benefit for everybody is by us being able to obtain and process and interrogate all that data for the greater good for all of our clients. And generally we almost always get agreement on that. We don't get much pushback on it because people can see the joint benefit of it.
Now you're focused obviously on rail. Is there any have you had any sort of working relationships with other domains? Again, sorry to put you on the spot here, but the technology often comes over. I'll tell you why. It made me smile probably a decade ago now, where someone at a certain railway company, nothing to do with you, said they had an innovative project which was selecting vegetation type, plant type from satellite imagery, so not something. And I thought that's funny because I was doing that in Brazil in 2014, right? So it depends on the domain. Things may be innovative in inverted commas given the domain. Have you got any reflection? I asked you specifically, but have you got any reflection on sharing across domains, and that maybe people haven't been so good at it before, and where you've been looking at other sectors? So it could be the imagery, it could be the drone, for example.
I think that there's a lot. It's definitely more of a sort of civils, geotechnical structures sort of element where there is clear crossover with people like highways, so on and so forth. So use of satellite. I think there's an INSAR project at the moment that's starting to show something interesting in the geotechnical world. Weather is another one that obviously affects everybody. so there's a lot of work done with people like Met Desk or the Met Office to understand the impact of convectional rainfall, which obviously doesn't just impact the railway, impacts roads as well. So those sorts of areas is where there's a lot of crossover. There's obviously a lot of Victorian bridges out there. Some hold trains, some hold cars. So I think that those are the elements where there is a huge amount of crossover. In terms of sort of IoT, I think that is starting to move across, and in terms of some basic engineering as well. If we move away from digitalization, lots of components that have come out of car manufacturing, for example, end up in the railway because they are the best component. Lubricants obviously apply to every industry that has moving parts, so there's a lot of crossover in that area. In the IoT world, there is some, but perhaps not as much. So it has been perhaps slower from an IoT for that crossover. But again, a MEMS accelerometer is a MEMS accelerometer. So I think the core components are probably the same. It's just the application that can be quite different as well.
Yeah, and it's making that business case. Again, this is part of what you'll help clients with. But again, just a reflection on clearly nothing to do with your company or your work, but just in other microcosms that I've worked in other sectors. One of the biggest challenges is making that robust business case in the first place to get innovative technology, because it's again nothing to do with us, but other people saying, oh well, we would like for example, an accelerometer on a particular asset. And it's almost self-evident, but getting that initial business case is hard. Have you got anything to say how you help client? Is it around safety? Is there anything else we haven't mentioned around how you to help people, even in other domains, how you get that initial business case to, for example, the executive, the CEO, or the operational director? What what's the tick list? What's the top 3 things we need to focus on?
Yeah, I think there's probably 6 elements. There might be more, but there's 6 that sort of spring to mind for a business case. And I guess my experience in Network Rail, the R&D program, put quite a robust and helpful calculator in place to sort of calculate the industry benefit of, you know, spending a small amount of money. What could it mean for the industry? So that then helps, you know, move things forward. So safety, obviously, if you can improve safety, that is clearly a very strong business case, and that's workforce or passenger or train operator or freight operator. So there's lots of dimensions to safety as well. Reliability / performance, those 2 things are linked but not directly. So you could have really good reliability and the performance is still poor, or you could have poor reliability and performance is okay. All depends on the train schedule, so on and so forth. But obviously, if you make it more reliable, there's a good chance you're going to improve performance. Anyway, I think in the past we got more reliable in the railway, but more trains, which meant that the performance still didn't improve because the number of trains running would have been much worse without the reliability projects. But I guess the cumulative effect of all the trains meant that the performance didn't necessarily improve to the scale expected. Efficiency is clearly a big one, particularly given COVID, given passenger numbers, given the amount of traffic, and the amount of spend on the railway from a passenger perspective, and the change from, I guess, business travel through to sort of holiday travel, all mean that there's a strong focus on efficiency projects at the moment. And then a whole life cost. So how can you make an asset last longer? How can you make sure that you get the maximal possible life out of a component? The cost of changing a full switch and crossing in a full renewal is phenomenal these days. So making sure that you pinpoint the right ones first of all, and then make sure that they give you the longest possible life, are all massive cost drivers these days. So you've got this sort of operational efficiency and capital efficiency, I guess. So there's 2 ways to look at that. And then passenger satisfaction, customer satisfaction. So all those elements, if you can improve if you can improve your working relationship with the train operator, and they can improve the passenger experience, they're all sort of elements to a business case. So there's lots to go at, and you obviously don't need to achieve all 6. So there's big opportunities. One of the biggest challenges is cause and effect. So if you make something more reliable, as I said, has that improved the performance? Did the performance improve because you did something else? Or there's so many things in a railway system that can go right or wrong. Being able to say that my project achieved this, it can be quite difficult. In an efficiency project, it can obviously be a bit simpler.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. That I mean, I was making a note because it's very interesting, particularly the whole life asset. I mean, that's sort of my obsession, this CapEx, the capital expenditure and operational and total. I mean, you get all this, but again, there is, just a shout out for the benefit of people new to these, there is an international standard ISO 55000 series, which Tim will be nodding at because he knows very well that I mean, that doesn't, you know, solve everything, but it gives that framework, that overview holistically of the asset. So I'll definitely link to that. But yeah, when you said point 4, I thought yes. And then you mentioned the cause and effect, the causality. That's really interesting, because it'll be interesting as artificial intelligence and machine learning develops, how it will, well, we hope it will be able to pick out that causality, which at the moment might not be apparent. I'm just making an observation that's sort of exciting for me personally, because I've had some experience of things like Six Sigma and Lean. You mentioned Lean there. They're fit for some purposes, but when the cause and effect isn't clear, I guess there is challenges. But I've nearly had my time with you, unbelievably. The time has gone. So Tim, so thank you so much. Like I say, I mean, there's hundreds of things I could ask you, given the sector and your experience, but who knows, maybe we'll do another podcast. So thank you. What I normally do is ask people if you would recommend any either websites. So it could be your website, your company website, but also any, say, conferences or references or industry bodies or something like that you'd recommend someone to look up. Have you got anything in mind?
Yeah, well, obviously KONUX's website is very good,
Of course.
KONUX. But no, I think in terms of conferences that we really like to attend, Rail Live in Stratford upon Avon, the summer one that's outdoors. That's just, you've got the full everything to do with infrastructure there. So you've got diggers and you've got technology companies and everything in between. So that's always a really good one. Rise of IoT conference. I think generally in Cologne in Germany. It's run by Rotoya Media. That is one that we always attend. I mean, there's so many that you've got to be careful which ones you go to. For me, the best ones are always the Permanent Way Institute. We are a huge advocates of working with the Permanent Way Institute. They offer so much to us, and we get a lot out of working with them. So yeah, they are definitely great to work with.
Great, thanks, Tim. I can say I've been a member of the P-Way, or the Permanent Way Institute, for about a decade at least now. So I would also absolutely agree with you. And for the people that don't know what Permanent Way is, the institution is for rail engineers, which might be self-evident, but just pick out. I won't ask you to explain what P-Way is, because I can't. Let's not go there. But railway stuff. But thanks, Tim. Thanks so much for your time and your insights. I'll obviously send a link to obviously your company website, but also the references that you've made. And thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and your experience with us today. So thank you, Tim Flower from KONUX. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.